Hello everyone, and welcome to our session today, the top 5 mistakes nurses make at interview. Our presenters are Nicole Nash-Arnold and Paul Armstrong. Nicole Nash-Arnold is a nursing career coach who helps great nurses transform into respected leaders. She shares her 15 years of experience in both senior and executive health leadership roles to germinate great leadership. Clinically, Nicole has over 10 years perioperative experience before moving into her nurse educator and management roles. Currently, she manages a privately owned emergency department in Brisbane. She has postgraduate qualifications in perioperative nursing and currently a Masters in Nursing. Nicole is a member of the International Coaches Federation. Paul Armstrong is the founder and director of Inner Sanctum Career Consulting. Paul Armstrong is an experienced and qualified career practitioner. Paul has an extensive background in administration of elite sport, in particular with Australian rules football. He has also been a teacher, development coordinator and AFL football manager. His most recent connection with the AFL was in a role where he managed the transition of AFL coaches, a position he enjoyed for over 5 years. Paul is a professional member of the Career Development Association of Australia and the Geelong Chamber of Commerce. Nicole and Paul, welcome to the microphone.
Thank you, Sue.
Sue, delighted to be here. Thanks for that introduction. Paul and I have come together today to talk about nurses at interview and to get you ready to feel confident at an interview so that you're appointable, that you approach an interview with clarity and that you have some nerves but that you're not paralysed by those nerves and that you've got a couple of templates to work with when you go through that interview process. The problem that a lot of nurses have with interviews is that our process for learning skills is that we come together and perform a skill that's relating to our patient care when we feel comfortable to do that, and we have formats and processes and clinical pathways to help us do that, and we have competencies to help us do that. And the old adage of see one, do one, teach one means that we have a way in which we feel comfortable before we jump in, and that doesn't happen with interviews. So as a result, after 15 years of conducting interviews, I've found 5 key mistakes that I think nurses make when they come together, and Paul and I are going to go through those today so that we can demystify those mistakes and give you some strategies for dealing with it. So let's take a look at mistake number 1. The first one are awful openings. As I said before, I think nurses find interviews fairly intimidating. We can handle a cardiac arrest and a blood pressure that's dropping rapidly and a sick child that's deteriorating and a mental health patient that's having a psychotic episode. But pop us in a room with a panel member or two and it's pretty quick that our confidence is gone. A lot of the time when I find nurses coming in for an interview and you sit them down, as a result of that they feel rattled. They're often either quite timid, they talk constantly about their nervousness, and sometimes they can become quite withdrawn. And the problem with that is first impressions, as we all know with interviews, are everything. Even if you're known to an organisation, it's really important that that first impression makes a mark at interview with people that you know, because most large organisations like hospitals are beholden to HR processes such as scoring interviews, and that relying on a pre-existing relationship that you have isn't going to save you at that interview. Paul, what are your thoughts on the nervous reactions and withdrawal and timid behaviour when people come to interview at this stage?
Thanks, Nicole. Look, I think it all goes back to the mindset of the person going in for the interview. This is a role that you've wanted to undertake for a long, long time. So you're exactly where you want to be. So be confident about that for a start. But if you understand in your own mind that you're perfect for the role, so you go in with that mindset, I am perfect for this role, then the rest of it will come out of that. Then by the end of the interview, you'll have convinced the others that you are perfect for the role, but you've got to understand that yourself. So you've got to be able to be very strong in your mind. Look, I'm perfect for this role. I've been dying for this opportunity to come and just show these other people why this role fits me so well. So it's the normal greetings when you first come in to meet anybody in any circumstance, that you have good posture, a nice confident stance, that you use eye contact, and as much as possible, Nicole, use names. You should have prepared and understand exactly who's on the interview panel. So find out about as much information as you possibly can about those people, and then when you go in, when you get introduced to somebody, repeat their name. So you might say, oh, hello, I'm Paul. Lovely to meet you, Paul. I'm Nicole. So make sure that there's that familiarity at the start, without it being too casual. To a nice professional approach, be appropriately attired, and speak confidently.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, what you make about feel like you are ready for this role. That's why you applied for it. And when this panel has already seen your CV, so if you weren't right for the role, then you would never have got to that interview stage. So you're already, you would have been pulled from the pile if you weren't up to scratch. So you've got to go forth and believe that you've got a right to be there and claim that right.
Exactly, and you should be excited internally, without jumping up and down, be excited and confident to say, wow, this is the opportunity I've been looking forward to. Here's my role, it's a perfect fit for me, and they're going to see that. By the time I finish this interview, those people are going to understand, gee, she's just a fantastic fit for this role.
Yeah,
Just on CVs, Nick, that you mentioned a moment ago.
Yeah.
I often encourage my clients to take in a couple of extra copies of their resume.
That's a good tip.
Not that the interview panel may not already have them. They probably should. But also, if they haven't, right, that's great. But also you can leave it in front of you, because we'll talk a little bit later about maybe referring to a resume if you get a little bit stuck. So there's nothing wrong with having your own resume with you. And the other thing I try to encourage people to take is just a portfolio about who they are, something in the plastic pockets about with maybe. If I said to most people, oh, where's your master's qualification? Oh, I don't know, it's in a cupboard somewhere. Or where's the referral you got from the last hospital you're at? Oh, I don't know, that's somewhere. Put all these things together. So all your qualifications, your commendations, your referrals, any professional development things that you've been to, any media that you might have had a photo in a local paper or something like that, put them all into a folio and just say, look, while we're speaking, here's my portfolio. I'd love you just to have a flick through it as we're engaging in the conversation.
Yeah, that's excellent, actually. It's a good time to do that too, when at the beginning, when you're sort of settling in before the formalities start too.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So mistake number 2. So we've gone through the informal part, the introductions, we've had a little bit of small talk, and we're feeling confident. The next is sort of the body of the interviews. So we are now starting to get into the process of the interview. And in our world, and I'm sure in most worlds, the chair of the panel will go through what will happen in that interview. And it's usually, I'll give you a little bit of information about the role, about the hospital, about the health service, a little bit of, housekeeping things. The chair of the panel will say, we're going to ask you some questions about your background and your experience and what you'll bring to the role, and then we'll give you the opportunity to ask some questions at the end. So this body of the interview is where the next key mistake will often happen, and that's too much information. Recently, I conducted some interviews, and we'd sort of set aside about 45 minutes for the interview and 15 minutes to discuss and write some notes and then move on to the next one on the hour and the next hour. And that's pretty a common time frame for an interview. There are about 7 questions, so you sort of allow a person being interviewed about 5 minutes to answer each of the questions. In this particular situation, we were asking about a quality improvement cycle, a project, or an improvement that the person had been involved in, and could he describe, what happened there and that sort of stuff. This particular person had talked for at least 10 minutes, and we had tried, a couple of times to truncate that because we were getting worried about time, but there wasn't a lot of construct or structure to his answer, and every time he would tell a part of the story and a side thought would pop into his head that he thought would be relevant for the panel to know, then he would start talking about that. So pretty promptly we'd stopped talking about the quality improvement cycle and quickly moved into performance management of staff and how he deals with team leaders and how he deals with the multidisciplinary team, with the doctors, and another story and another story. And we quickly lost sight of what the question was and what his answer was. And the key issue was that there was no theme or construct to his answer. Paul, have you had similar experiences where people have had difficulty framing their questions?
Yeah, and I understand why people get there and they are well prepared, they've done all their homework and they're ready to go. Then they get the first question that usually is, tell us a bit about yourself. So then they try to answer the next 10 questions that are likely to come in that single answer.
That's exactly right.
Wow, stop. So be short and to the point and concise. As soon as you start to ramble, people will drift off. So just answer the specific question you've been given. So as the question's being asked, okay, yes, I knew this question was coming. This is the answer for that individual question, just for that question, not the whole interview, because people do ramble on, Nick, and then and then sometimes they go off, as you just mentioned, and they'll branch off into something else, and that becomes another story.
Yes, that's exactly what happened.
To the question. So be concise, answer concisely, shorten to the point, and also be honest. Sometimes we can sort of, you think, oh, I'm going to try to impress them here, so you might exaggerate a little bit, and then that becomes, then you end up trying to justify that exaggeration by, again, wandering off into another tangent. So just answer the question that's been asked, and you're better off to answer too briefly than go for too long.
No, I agree. And in fact, there are a lot of times, I think, where this is the danger of, I think perhaps people are over-prepared, which is they've got certain things that they know they want to talk about. They want to talk about their clinical skills, and they know they've got to talk about quality and a conflict, and they've got all of these answers in their head. And sometimes they only listen to half the question, and they hear one key word, which might be risk. And so they go off on their risk and their governance answer, and actually the question was about how do you resolve conflict, but they heard the one key word and went off on that, and can talk for a long time about that before they've actually heard and given a lot of information, but it's not actually relevant to the question that's been asked. So that is a danger of just giving too much information too quickly and going off before you actually, like as you say, really listen to the question and answer just that question.
So saying too much inevitably counts against you.
Yes, I agree. So a strategy to use for that is the STAR principle. So it is not solution. I'm sorry, I thought I'd fix that. It's situation, task, action, results. So that works by giving you a framework by which you can give to your answer, and it works really well for behavioural questions like tell me about a time when, and that's a fairly common format in health questions, in health interviews, where we want to know about your behaviours and how you responded to a situation. So you would give the the situation. So you would describe the scenario that you found yourself in. So if it was a quality improvement cycle, you might say, I identified a problem where patients weren't getting to the ward, and very quickly as a result of the way we had to fax the paperwork through the organisation. Next, you would describe the task, and that's not necessarily, that's different from actions. That's the task as in the rationale for why that task was an issue or a problem, or why it could be improved. So in this particular example, you might say, waiting for 45 minutes for faxes to be received was an issue because it was impeding our patient flow from the emergency department. And for the 4-hour rule, we were wasting almost 1/3 of that just on paperwork. And so we needed to expedite that process so that we could get the patient cared for in the appropriate place where they needed to receive their care. The next section, which is action, is then you describe your tasks, the actions that you took. So it might be you met with the key stakeholders, you sat down with the receptionists, you sat down with the manager of the receiving wards to work out what they needed from this process, understand why it took 45 minutes for the fax to get from A to B, why the patient had to wait for that fax. And in that process, you may have found a great solution for an email option, and it was actioned really, really quickly. So you put that into place. The last part of the STAR template for result is probably the most forgotten part. Lots of people tell the story about what they did, why they did it, and how they did it, but they don't often talk about the outcome. And no good book has ever been written without an ending and without, an outcome for all of the characters. And this story is no different. And you have to make sure that you talk about what outcome happened. Did the patient start to get out of the department 45 minutes early? Were the stakeholders happy? Did it work? What evaluation did you take? What surveys? What were the outcomes? What tweaks? And particularly important in the health industry, which is very outcome focused and very evaluation focused, is going through what outcome that you got from whatever process that you undertook. Paul, is that a technique that you've seen used before?
Yeah, we use it all the time, and we actually use a little bit even shorter than that, Nicole. It's PAR, P-A-R. It's identify. You get asked the question. For example, you might get asked the question of, as team leader, tell us about a circumstance where you had some issues with communication in your group. So you say, okay, look, was in charge of a project, we had 6 people there, and there seemed to be a lot of disagreement about the direction the place was heading. So that was the problem I had. I therefore met each team member individually and explained the importance of positive communication and working well together. And as a result of that, we had fewer issues in regards to that project, and we were able to get the project completed and done on time. Now, you're exactly right, Nicole, when you say if there's not a positive result, or worse still, if there's a negative result, don't even go there. Don't go there.
Absolutely.
What people want to know are the outcomes, the positive outcomes of the action that you took. So if it wasn't a positive outcome, the action that you took was no good. So therefore, then
there's no place for it in this interview.
No, so it's either yours, the STAR, which is the situation, tasks, action, results, or the PAR. What was the problem? What actions did you take, and what was the result?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Our third mistake is tied up with that same mistake, but the total opposite. So where people give too little information. And in my experience, the reason that they give too little information is not because they don't have it to give. It's often that the nerves have got the better of them, and they have a mind blank. And that is, it's your worst nightmare. When you're nervous about the interview the night before, your very worst scenario is the mind blank. And when people have the mind blank, they often fixate on that problem, and they'll actually say in the interview, oh, I'm just really, really nervous and my mind has gone blank and I just can't think of that situation, and I know that I've done 100 quality improvement processes or situations about resolving conflict as a team leader. I can't think of one right now. What advice do you give to people, Paul, when they are overcome with the nerves, with the killer mind blank?
Firstly, don't ever say, I'm really nervous.
No.
It's like listening to someone who's about to make a speech and they get up there and they say, look, I'm not really good at this public speaking, but I'm going to give it a go.
I agree.
I've tuned out straight away. I'm not listening anymore. I think I'm listening to you. Because we often sound far different than we think we sound. We
Yes.
think, oh, I'm not confident, I'm really nervous, I hope they don't pick it up, my voice will be quavering. Your voice won't be quavering. And people won't understand that. People won't pick that up. So for a start, never say that I'm nervous. If you're not sure about something, just pause and think. And there's no problem with saying, oh, I'm not quite sure there, I need to buy a little bit of time here. Excuse me, would you mind repeating that question? I wasn't quite sure what you meant, even if it was a very simple question. So the interviewer then repeats the question. That's giving you a little bit more time to maybe refer or come up with an answer. Or, as I mentioned earlier, you might have your resume in front of you and you know there's been a circumstance in there, but for some reason your mind's gone blank. But you might say, if you still can't come up with something, say, look, you might want to refer to my resume here on page 3, and you can see where I spoke there about such and such. So you're actually got it in front of you, and that's prompting you to be able to talk more about whatever that answer was that you needed to come up with. So you certainly never say, I'm nervous, and just pause, take your time, and if you need to, ask for them to repeat the question. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that stage of clarifying is against the rules. That, you know, that they have one chance. It's like an exam. You have one chance of hearing the question and one chance of being able to answer. And in fact, it's just like a normal conversation. If I didn't hear what you'd asked me, Paul, I'd say, you know, sorry, could you say that again? And, you know, no one's going to spontaneously combust because you clarified. And, you know, that's where that preparation is really, really important, because there are some really predictable things that will be in an interview, and they're going to be asked universally in every interview that a nurse will have, in at pretty much whatever level, and they are things like governance and quality and your clinical background and team leading and conflict resolution and those sorts of things. So you can think through those predictable questions. And I love your tip of having a CV at the ready so that you can refer to it. I can't imagine any situation in an interview where that would be objectionable to the panel. And when you have that mind blank, then you can refer to it and you'll go, oh, that's right, I did this project, and, you know, you can continue on.
Absolutely. And you'll see with public speakers that many of the really seasoned public speakers look like they're talking off the cuff, but they've probably got a sheet of paper in front of them that's got half a dozen points. Now, they end up never referring to the points, but that's because they prepared so well. So when they were going through their preparation, they were writing down these points anyway. When they got up to speak, they were sort of second nature, and they often don't refer to them. So that's a little bit the same with your preparation for an interview. You'll always get asked, you know, what are your great strengths? You know, what's your 1 or 2 weaknesses? Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Like, it's the same question in any interview, anywhere in the world. They're the same ones that get rolled out. So have some things prepared. Yeah,
no, I agree completely. Number 4, there aren't many answers in an interview that are the wrong answers. You know, people want to know about you and want to know your story and want to know about your background and how that's going to fit with the role that they're interviewing. There are a very few where there are just the wrong answers, and they're the classic misfires where you've just given the really not inappropriate answer, but they're just not a good answer. And not many people do this, but when they do, it's really important, I think, to make sure people understand why they are wrong. I'll give you an example of some years ago, I had an orderly in the operating theatre that I worked in who applied for the police force or the Australian Police or something like that. And the question was the one that you just mentioned, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And his answer was, sitting on the beach drinking pina coladas on my long service leave. And not many times can you hear a penny drop in an operating theatre's tea room, but we all looked at him and said, oh, why did you say that? And he said, because I wanted to demonstrate that I was committed to the organisation. And I thought, there's merit in the madness. But those sorts of answers and flippant answers, there's a time for sense of humour in a interview, and there's other times where it's not. And the other one where a lot of people go wrong is where do you see yourself in 10 years? And the answer is in your job, which isn't a great answer either. Paul, what are your thoughts on those sorts of answers, the flippant sort of answers where you're trying to get a message across in a, comical way or but it just doesn't quite sail?
Yeah, the one that'll get a black line through your name straight away is if you get asked about your former company or employer and if you bag them or criticise them, that's it. You may as well just pack up and walk out the door. Because if I'm an interviewer at an organisation and you're plotting where you've come from, you're going to do exactly the same about us and about me. And if you're silly enough to be critical of your former boss to another boss, potential boss, you're kidding yourself. That's a real no-no. The other one you'll often get asked is about your weakness, as I mentioned before, and some people will say, I'm too caring or this sort of thing, whatever. You need to have something that you're not good at. We're not all good at everything. I'm hopeless at IT and computers. So if I was asked the question, what are your weaknesses? I'd say, look, I'm not the quickest at typing on a computer, or my data entry is not great, but I've done a short desktop course in Excel, or whatever it might be. So identify a weakness that you may have, but also mention the fact that you're addressing this weakness by doing such and such about it. I reckon that's really important. And they don't need to be big weaknesses. They don't need to be, look, I'm no good at nursing. That's not going to get you far. But there might be tiny little bits and pieces that you might get angry if you can't get a project done on time or that sort of thing, or you become slightly irrational if that's the case. Well, that's sort of fine. But you're addressing these issues. You're trying to improve on these issues. Another one you'll get asked a lot is how long before you'll be able to make a difference to our organisation. Now, to be impractical to say, you'll notice a difference straight away. Well, no, you won't.
No.
So best to say, look, I think I'll be working hard as soon as I get into this role. There's no doubt about that. But given time, everyone else will be able to see that my expertise and my obligation to the job will enable me to be spoken to about potentially greater opportunities further down the track. But no doubt that I'll be up and about from day one. But like anything, it'll take me some time to have a significant influence around the place. That's fine.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that people are really good at working out what their weaknesses are and really terrible at working out what their strengths. So they struggle through the what are your strengths question, and then are really happy to indulge in the weaknesses question. But actually the weaknesses question is a really good opportunity to show in a bit like the STAR or the PAR principle of there was a problem, these are the actions I took and these are the results. And often people's weaknesses can be a real strength now. I was quite shy in the workplace and that was a problem for me, so I did A, B and C. And now I'm really confident and, so those sorts of things. The weaknesses question can be a real opportunity, actually, that people often...
You should never be afraid to talk yourself up a little bit because the next person will. So
exactly.
Some people might be a good people person. I hate that title. Let's say, so if someone asks you what your strengths are, you might say, look, people seem to enjoy working with me. Or Joe Blow told me I've always been loyal. Or my friend asked me why I've stayed at such a company for such a long time, etc., etc. So they're the sorts of strengths. They're not necessarily that I've got a master's in nursing, but they're about personal strengths, about, look, you'll never have to tell me twice because I'm pretty teachable. I seem to be able to pick up things pretty quick. They're sort of lighter ways to say I'm pretty good.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty good. So
no.
The one question you mentioned earlier, Nick, that I didn't answer was about where you see yourself in 5 years' time, which is a common question again. I would answer, I see myself here having an influence on this organisation and in a position in 5 years where I've developed into some significantly responsible positions. That kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
But, this is what you want. This is my future. This is the direction I'm heading. This really fits well for me, and I want to be here and play a key.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think preparing the answers, particularly to those usual suspects, and having a think about, where you do see yourself in this organisation in 5 years will make those often awkward questions really easy.
Absolutely.
Mm. Excellent. So usually what happens at this stage, once we get to the where do you see yourself in 5 years questions, you're getting to the end of the interview. And usually the interview, the formal part of the interview will close at that stage. And you can feel the difference in the room, and often I'll say, right, that's the end of the formal questions. Do you have questions for us? And you can feel the instant relief in that person being interviewed, like, oh, it's actually over. The problem with that is that sometimes the clothes can be a bit ordinary and a bit, a little bit too informal and like, oh, it doesn't matter what I say now because, the formal questions are over. When I interview people, my favourite question and the most revealing question is, do you have any questions for us?
Yes.
Because I think it's very telling about how they see themselves. And I think changing roles and changing responsibilities and new jobs is one of the top 25, in the top 25 of most stressful life experiences that you go through. So if you're going to ask someone, do you have any questions about a very potentially stressful and life-changing role, and they don't have anything to ask, that's unusual. And it kind of says to me, you're not really that thinking forward and positioning yourself in that role to be thinking, I'm a bit worried about this, or don't know how that's going to work, or I'm unclear about this part of the responsibility of the role, or, I think it's revealing if there are no questions at the end. There are a couple of terrible ones, like how much do I get paid, particularly in our industry that's almost universally standardised, and roles don't deviate even in the public or private sector from the award. And there's two ends of the continuum that people take at this stage, and it's too far and too little, like, how much do I get paid at one end of the continuum, and the other is a little bit too philosophical about the big picture. And I recently had a nurse say, what were my thoughts about the role of the registered nurse in the big picture philosophically and the healthcare of Australia, and how did I think she would fit into that scope of nursing practice? And it was such a big question, and I struggle to understand the relevance of why that was important to ask at that juncture. So it wasn't really an appropriate question. She obviously really wanted to have a big question, and that was her big question, but it wasn't really the time or the place. Paul, what do you think about when the pressure's off a little bit at that time, and you can feel that difference when it changes, about what you should take that opportunity to be?
You need a conclusion in every story, and if you fail to ask the question back, as you said, Nick, you're not completing the picture for yourself. So
yes, exactly.
Two things I'd do. If there was something I'd well prepared about, I was expecting a question maybe on are you a lifelong learner? I didn't get that question. I had a really good answer for it. I might then turn that around to say to them, what's the organisation's attitude to people who are lifelong learners?
Yes.
Or look, I believe the culture of this organisation, because they might have said, you might have an answer about culture, how to improve culture in an organisation, and you didn't get a chance to come up with it, and there was a bit of gold there, and you thought, well, so why don't you ask them, look, this organisation has a reputation to be really culturally sound and seems to have grown. Was there any particular way you went about that? How did you improve the culture of the organisation, or how do you see yourself as an organisation? But I think the one you should always ask is that, does the organisation provide opportunities for professional development for their staff?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And then they'll always say, yes, we do. And they might even give some examples and so forth. But just by asking that question is implying that you want to join, but you still want to grow, you still want to develop. So ask them about their attitude for professional development for their staff.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a great opportunity to have those conversations about the sort of the macro and the not and a little bit of the micro. You know, like. Particularly in our industry where a lot of people work part-time and it's a job sharing role, and you want to maybe have a conversation with them at that time about, you know, these are my situation, you know, I'm really keen on the job sharing opportunity that this presents, you know, and it's a good opportunity to talk about flexibility and have that conversation around, you know, your needs without getting into the finer details of, I have childcare on a Friday, can I not work on a Friday? But just to, you know, set that tone about a couple of restraints that you might have, or, you know, that you have going to the future. And it is an interview is a dialogue, and it is a conversation, and it is a little bit more informal than it was before. And it's a really great opportunity to showcase your ability to be now a normal person who can have a conversation.
Absolutely. So once you've asked a couple of the sort of questions we spoke about, development, culture and so forth, there's nothing wrong with asking, as you just said, look, how will the process move forward? You know, you would say, you'd notice my referees there, look, I'd encourage you to talk to my referees and make sure you have referees. Some people put referees available on request. I reckon that means nothing. I'd rather see names there. You know, there's head of nursing and such, her name and her contact details. I'm ringing them, and I think in nursing, and you'll be able to tell me more so than I would know, that you definitely do reference.
Absolutely. It's standard.
Yeah, so make sure that you have good referees. You've got to say the right thing about you, but make sure that you encourage them to talk to the referees, because that's, again, implying that you're confident. You'd love somebody else to talk about you, and they'll be able to talk about you in glowing terms, etc. And I reckon it's really important at the end of an interview just to say thanks. Thanks. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great, because there's three key things, Nick, in any interview that the interview panel are looking for. Do you have the first one is, do you have the skills? Now the skills will come from all your qualifications and your training, etc. So the first one is skills. The second one is, what's your attitude like? How are you going to get on with other people? You know, how are you approachable? Are you confident? So first one, skills. Second one, attitude. And the third one's a little bit harder to define, but it's very important. Do you fit this role? So all during the interview, you've been talking about all the key competencies and the key responsibilities in the role. All your conversation, all your discussions being directed back about that, about what this role is and how you can help with the role. That makes you a good fit or otherwise. So it's about right skills, having the right attitude, and are you a good fit? And it's as simple as that. And if you can leave the interviews to say, well, look, I've expressed as much as I possibly can about those three things, that's as much as you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And just on the references, it's really important to have references, and every single employer wants to talk to your current manager. So when you've got there in your CV that you've got you're working at the Royal Brisbane Hospital, yet your manager isn't at the Royal Brisbane Hospital, that sparks some concern. And I think a lot of people do that because they don't want to tell their manager. And for the most part, referees won't be contacted until after interview and you're fairly likely to secure the role. So that's not so much of a concern at the point at which you're pre-interview or at interview. The other thing that's really terrible with references is, as a potential employer, and you ring that reference and the reference says, I didn't know that they had asked me to do that. That's always a mistake, because you think, right, they probably should have communicated that with you. So that's a really important point on with references as well.
Yeah, no, but you should ask the person if they wouldn't mind, and 9 times out of 10, of course, they won't mind. If they get asked, they're unlikely to say that you are capable of the role. And there might have been something with that former supervisor or manager, that it was just a personality clash with yourself that you didn't get on, but that shouldn't affect the way you go about your work. So the quality of your work is what the next employer wants to hear about.
Yes, exactly.
So don't be afraid, but also if you then contact your former direct report and say, look, would you mind being a referral? Of course they're going to do that for you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. And there's often that time at the interview, at that close, where the informal questions are happening, where you can say, I haven't actually contacted my referees yet. I wanted to wait to get to interview. And I've had many number of people, and I'll say, yeah, no, that's fine. I can, let you know when to let them know, because sometimes you don't contact everybody's referees. So that's a good opportunity to flag that you haven't told them yet, because that's normal, that you haven't divulged that you're considering leaving the current organisation. So that's a good time. I like your skills and attitude and fit for the role, actually, because that's a really good description of what happens after you're escorted from the room, about what happens in that 15 minutes after the 45-minute interview process of what we do. We talk about, well, sometimes they don't have the skills, but the skills can be taught, but they're a great attitude. And a lot of people will recruit to culture more than they'll recruit to skills, because it's really hard to fix attitude, but it's not so hard to fix skills. And also whether you're a fit for the role and how you're going to fit with the team. And that's not something that you can control so much, but certainly the attitude and following these 5 mistakes and avoiding them will help you sit in a position where you clearly have a strong attitude that you will sit closer to the fit for a role, even if sometimes you lack a skill or two in the area, because that can be taught.
Absolutely. And look, you're not going to gun at every interview. There's going to be other people there who are going to be slightly better fit than you, and they're going to get the role and you don't. Or there might be interviews that you completely bomb. But do something about that straight away. As soon as you get out into the car, write down how it went. These were the things that went well. This went really poorly. Get some feedback about it. Identify what you did really well. Look back on your preparation for it, your routine. Were you rushing around beforehand? Did you get there too late? Et cetera, et cetera. And then it doesn't hurt to, and a lot of people don't do this, it doesn't hurt to contact the interview panel or the organisation, even if it's via email, the next day to say, thank you for the time yesterday. I really enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to hearing back from you down the track.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people don't do that. And it might be you might just ring and say, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. I really enjoyed it. Kind regards, Nicole.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. Yeah.
And that's really excellent too, in the event that you aren't successful in the role, is that you've already opened that dialogue up for them to say, hey, listen, you interviewed really strongly, but you didn't quite have A, B and C. And therefore, that's another thing that you can add to the, right, so now I need to go and get those and I'll be right for next time.
Absolutely. And if you get the dreaded phone call and say, look, sorry you missed out, ask that question. Don't be afraid to say. You're entitled to say, look, what was it that I need to get better at next time? Don't pot anybody else who got the job or anything else. Just say, look, this is an area I really want to grow and develop in. What do you think I need to do to better present myself? And the interviewers are quite happy to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So that's the end of our top 5 mistakes. For people who have listened to this and feel like they could do with some more help, I have, with Paul, put together a little pack of resources that people can get from my website, and I've got the link there, where I've got a couple of articles, I've got the slides of this presentation, and our tips. There'll be a recording of this as well, this interview that we've done, and then people can refer to it closer to the time when they're going to be at interview. So that's us.
And look, if anyone just Googles Inner Sanctum Careers, my website will come up, and all the details about what I offer there is on that site. So I'd be happy to speak to any of your clients or any nurses that are going for an interview and a little bit concerned about which direction they want to take. I can do that via Skype or over the phone or via email, so happy to help out if they see that as a need.
Yeah, fantastic. I've got all those details in my little interview pack as well.
Nicole and Paul, thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. Now, if you are attending this session live and you have a question that you would like to ask of Nicole or Paul, you can just type that into the Q&A little box and hit send, and it will go straight
I've lost you
through
too,
to them.
Oh,
are you there? Hello?
we're here. I can hear you now.
That's good. Oh, that's good.
I can hear you, Sue.
Excellent. Now, Nicole, with number 5, the poultry close.
Yes.
And we talked about references, and certainly you would expect to see someone's immediate supervisor listed. What does one do if you don't get on with your immediate supervisor? What is the reason you're leaving is you just don't get on with them? That's why you're looking for another job.
That's always a tricky situation, and it does cause a great deal of anxiety for a lot of people, and I have a lot of people ask me that question. I think for the most part that relationship that you feel is difficult is often perceived and not necessarily real. And just like Paul had said earlier, most people can compartmentalise how they feel about you personally versus how they feel about you professionally, and they can speak intelligently and professionally about your conduct and your ability to perform this role, and they can keep the personal side as a separate issue. And for the most part, if there were performance issues that have happened, they're in the past, and most people would keep that as a employer-employee relationship and not necessarily divulge that during a reference, unless they're directly asked. But for the most part, I think people can keep the professional and the personal separate.
And I love the fact that you reiterated that it's important that your referees know that they're going to be contacted, because there's nothing worse than... It does happen a lot, that you'll get a phone call out of the blue saying, blah, 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 has identified you as a referee. Are you happy to answer these questions? And you think...
Little tumbleweed at the other end of the phone and think, oh, this is weird.
Yeah. Or you get the person who says, oh... No, you're right, Paul, you go.
It just reminded me to speak very briefly about social media. As soon as you apply for a job, and Nicole will be like anybody else, any other panel, they'll do a search for you on Google, whether that be through LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook and so forth. And there might be occasions where they're sitting there looking at you and saying, wow, I don't know whether you're the same person as I read about on Facebook, or who's still had a Hotmail email address, etc., etc. Be very careful about the whole package, about how you present yourself. And often some people, when they leave an organisation, they might think they're just talking to their friends on Facebook, but say something like, gee, I'm glad I'm out of there, I couldn't stand working with so-and-so, and well, good life for me. It might be a little tiny thing that they've said in anger, but that'll really count against you down the track. You've got to be really careful about how you present the whole package. Yep,
agreed, totally.
And people do look up your social media identity. It's very easy to do.
I'll be looking up yours as soon as we finish this to see what you do.
And I'm confident you'll find an exceptional one, Paul.
I read a statistic recently that only 1 in 4 people feel that they should keep their professional and social media separate, as in how they behave on Facebook is different to how they behave on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is, it is for professionals, and it isn't where you post your latest Saturday night rave, or where, your niece's birthday party is on and that kind of stuff. So I was surprised. 1 in 4 people thought, whatever for LinkedIn.
It's interesting, isn't it? The other thing I was going to ask you, with awful openings, One thing we didn't talk about was how you present yourself. Like, what do you wear? Do you have the flowing tresses over the shoulder, or does one present themselves as you would in a professional setting if you were actually working in that role?
Yes.
So you try to dress a little bit better than you normally would if you were successful in the role. For instance, if I was going for a role in a bank, or not so much a bank, say in a management organisation where ties weren't necessary, that it was just, suit and open neck shirt, that was the common way that people dressed, I would go to an interview with a tie on. Just that one slight step above. Certainly not the other way, certainly not in jeans. But if you're going for a nursing interview, that's a very professional occupation. So you need to suit up.
Yeah, I agree.
And look, I'm no stylist. Nick will be able to tell you more. You need to go and look professional. Now, people might say, oh, I'm expressing myself by having, something in my nose or whatever. That's fine. God bless you. But that will count against you. If you want to present yourself professionally, you need to do that. That's more important from the interviewer's point of view than you having an expression of whatever that might be.
Yeah. If it's something that you'd wear to the movies, then it's not something that you're wearing to an interview.
And the other, a number of colleagues that have not been successful, and I like the analogy that you spoke of, Nicole, when you said, just because you've worked for an organisation, don't rely on your relationships. Because a lot of colleagues will say, they know I'm a good clinician, I can't understand why I didn't get this job. But they believed that they would get it based on the relationship and based on their work. But as you rightfully said, you're going up for an interview against everyone else that they're interviewing, and there are criteria that need to be met.
Yeah, and particularly in a large organisation, like Queensland Health, for example, they're very beholden to merit-based employment practices, and you can't rely that your relationship and your knowledge of the department and, you're very, very senior and you're very, very skilled will get you through, and that you'll turn up on the day and that's enough. And I've had a lot of times where I've been put in a really difficult situation where I know person A was a fit for the job, and they have the skills, but they weren't able to demonstrate that skills, attitude and fit for the role in that hour of their life, because they were very complacent about the fact that we knew her, so it didn't really matter. And then someone else would walk in, person B, who interviews beautifully and executes those skills, attitude and fit for the role really well. You're stuck in a situation where you have to give it to that person because they performed on the day.
And that's why, and historically, I suppose, it's only been relatively recently, in the day, if you were a nurse, you basically, contacted the hospital and said, I'm a nurse, and they said, oh, well, that's good, we need one of them, come in. But on the eastern seaboard of Australia,
yep, absolutely,
there are so many nurses who are unemployed that there is a pool in which employers are drawing from now. It's no longer the case that scarcity is going to guarantee you that job.
No, not at all.
So, look, a very, very interesting topic, Nicole and Paul. And again, I would reiterate that on Nicole's website, which is Nurse Manager HQ, you will be able to find a number of, I've become tongue-tied. You will be able to find a number of resources available to you, which includes the notes from this afternoon, the recording of the interview that Nicole and Paul undertook, as well as tips and facts to assist you with that interview. And it is vitally important that we all hone that skill. Nicole Nash-Arnold and Paul Armstrong, thank you very much for participating today.
Absolute pleasure.
So today we've been listening to Nicole Nash-Arnold from Nurse Manager HQ and Paul Armstrong from Inner Sanctum Consulting. To everyone who's listening, I wish you an absolutely fabulous day.